Today is known as Passion Sunday in the liturgical tradition. And we hear that word passion and we might think of something like a footballer who is going all out to win their career, or a celebrity chef dreaming up wonderful new combinations of food to delight, or maybe even the romantic attentions of one person towards another. Passion often means to us something that we're invested in, those things that take our time and our energy and our money. But passion in this context on the Sunday links back to the Latin word pati, which means to suffer. And it's during this time of Lent when we begin to focus our vision on what is to come in the journey of Jesus. And along this journey, Jesus has dropped hints, but mostly his disciples just can't take it in. And we can't really blame them, can we? Because if we're honest, we can't take it in either. We don't want to hear that things are going to be painful, that things are going to change, that life is going to be different and can never be the same again. That's the kind of thing we just do not want to hear. But Jesus speaks honestly to his disciples to prepare them, to get them ready for what must take place. And today he speaks honest words to us as well. And these are the words he says. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Jesus is unveiling for us a deep mystery. And he's helping us to understand all kinds of things at the same time. Firstly, for us who know how the story is going to play out, it's quite clear that he's speaking of his own death. In this reading, Jesus is like that seed that must be crushed and fall to the ground and die, so that from that death all kinds of new and abundant life might shoot forth in the world. But secondly, he's not just restricting that image to himself. Rather, he tells all who will listen, this is the journey that you must take too. It is a pattern revealed in nature in various ways, but one that we all desperately seek to avoid. For new life to come, there must first be a death of an old life. This path, this pattern cannot be bypassed. The trouble is that's what we tend to do. We're scared of death, and that's natural. We all reach a stage in life, don't we, when we suddenly realise that the years behind us are more numerous now than the ones ahead of us. And that can come as quite a blow to some people. It can cause quite an existential crisis or panic. We don't like thinking about that. And our culture helps us in that avoidance by giving us many, many things to help us not think about the end of life. And so we kill pain. We prolong life. We avoid death talk at all costs. And without passing judgment, just look at how we practice our funeral rites these days. Everything is taken care of away from view. But this pandemic has brought into our view, into the front of our minds, that reality of mortality, and perhaps more pressingly our own mortality. And for some people that confrontation has been mild, but for others it's been quite a difficult thing to wake up to. But Lent offers us the chance to hear again Jesus' words, telling us plainly that if you seek to avoid death, if you try and pretend it's not there, if you spend your life afraid of it, then you are closing yourself off from true life. We can think of death as a kind of multi-layered image, or a word with many meanings. The primary meaning is obvious. It's the one that bothers us the most, maybe, at the end of physical life as we know it. But then on top of that are all kinds of other different ways that this language of death applies to us and can impinge on our lives. You can speak about death as an end of relationship. It can describe those closing down of opportunities and dreams and hopes for the future. And as in our reading today, death can even speak powerfully to the choice that we must make to let go of the old and enter into something new. It is like going through death. And Jesus uses the language, doesn't he? Very strong language, shocking language at first, that unless you hate your life, you cannot enter into new life. Some people certainly do hate their lives. Let's not take that lightly. But I don't think he means it in just the way as we've just heard it, perhaps. He says, hate your life, and I think it means hating those parts of life that are shrinking our humanity and are marring in us the image of God. It's the part of life that tells us, focus on your own needs, forget everyone else. It is the part of life that tells us it's okay to be unforgiving, because why should people get away with hurting us? It's the part of our lives that tells us there's not enough room for everyone else, so take what's mine while I can get it. That is the side of life that we are called to hate. Any attitude or behaviour or belief that diminishes and shrinks our humanity, that makes us self-centred, and that gives us an excuse to ignore the pain and the suffering of the world around us. Hate that life, Jesus says. And unless you do, you cannot enter into new life. So what's the better approach? What's better than just focusing on our own needs and avoiding death and looking at life as if we can do it all our own way? Well, Jesus models the better way in what he says and what he is going to do. Embrace death and don't try to run away from it. Jesus knew that he was heading along a certain path. He knew what was ahead, and he embraced that path because he knew that it was only on that path, through death, that the healing of humanity and all the wounds that we carry could actually happen. By him going through that death is bringing life to countless others. And beyond that death, he knew that life was certain to come. In reality, he knew that that was the only way for life to come. As he says, unless that grain is crushed and it falls to the ground and it dies, it remains simply just one grain of wheat alone, and ultimately meaningless. But if it does experience that crushing defeat of death, it becomes open to the possibility of new beginnings. And the mystery that Jesus is explaining to us today is this one. Once you can embrace that truth, once you can believe it, you are now set free to live life in a more bold and vibrant and generous way. It sets you free from the fear of death, which hinders so much of our lives. And we know this is true from experience. Just look at the way that we value people who risk their own lives. Just think of the high regard we have now for nurses and doctors and other people who have been frontline workers. How these people exposed themselves to the virus before even a vaccine was made. How they kept going to work day after day, knowing that it could actually mean their death too. But their work was all the more vibrant, all the more meaningful because of that risk. And that's been the thinking of the church ever since the beginning. Those early Christians who knew that death wasn't possible but likely, for whom taking up a cross was literal, not metaphorical. For others who knew that persecution and torture and horrific violence was theirs if they took this way of Christ. But that threat of death, which was almost constant, was actually a toothless threat, because they had already conquered death by giving themselves to Christ. And so they went boldly about their work, being a witness for him in the world. Those first Christians were known for putting themselves in all the places that everyone else would refuse to go. They went into the places where infection was high. They tended the sick. They visited those put in prison. They took care of orphans left alone and widows on their own. They took in the stranger, and so on and so on. They risked their lives. They looked death in the face, and it gave their witness almost like a megaphone, if you will, almost like a zooming in. It made their lives so much more valuable, not less valuable. And so all of this, what does that mean for you and me today in our lives? How might these words of Jesus offer us a challenge this Lent? Well, I think perhaps we are being called once again to reckon with death, not to become obsessed with it or to seek it, but to acknowledge the reality of it. And having acknowledged that, to see it all through the eyes of Jesus. And through the eyes of Jesus, this death becomes an open door rather than a dead end. I think we're being challenged to allow our lives today to be made new by giving up the things that must die in us. And at the risk of moving too far ahead in the story in a few weeks' time, we look at death through resurrection eyes. We see that there are no endings for those who belong to Christ. Whatever we feel that we have lost this past year and more, whatever endings are still ahead of us as we come, whatever things we must endure, whatever sorrow we carry, whatever pain is in our hearts, from that ground can blossom new shoots of life, new futures from unexpected places. So what might that new life look like that's going to blossom up from that dying seed? Well, it will look like one who is with those who suffer. It will look like one who will take bold risks in order to be next to those who have been rejected, left behind by the rest of the world. It will look like those who are willing to take the Christ light into the dark corners of society. The question is, can we believe Jesus' words for ourselves? Can we believe that only through giving up life that we can receive life? And perhaps more importantly, can we believe that for our church today? Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Amen.